So good morning, everyone. Or good evening, or depending on which time zone you're in. Let's start with the ADO.NET save points feature. Shai, do you want to talk about it?
Sure. Save points are a standard SQL thing. All relational databases, as far as I know, support them. Not aware of anyone that doesn't. What save points are is basically you have a transaction. A transaction can be rolled back or committed, obviously, as everybody knows, but you can also establish save points within those transactions. Sometimes people refer to this a bit like nested transactions, but that's not quite accurate. So save points, you can create several, but always inside a transaction. What you could do with save points is you can roll back to them after having gone forward in the transaction. You can just jump back, like roll back to the point where it was created. And in most databases, you can also release them, which is sometimes people think about it a little bit like committing, but it's not, nothing has been committed until the transaction as a whole has been committed. That's like a very, very important point. Now, this is a thing that's, again, supported by all databases almost. There's no API exposed in system data in ADO.NET. There is SQL client support for this going way back to the beginning. So the SQL transaction exposes two methods, save and rollback for this. They accept a string. So save points have a name, which identifies them because you can have several. The Postgres driver and PG-SQL basically followed suit and did the same thing, adding a release as well, which SQL Server lacks. And this issue is about promoting or at least bringing an API into system data that would, do this and allow database agnostic programming to do save points. So there's a tiny bit of syntax differentiation between the databases. So this would basically encapsulate that and allow anybody to just go to a DB transaction. Something like an EF core or any sort of ORM could just go and manage save points with an API. So much for that. A few quick notes on this. I'll try to be very, very short. The API proposal as it is basically a copy of the SQL client and NPG SQL APIs because they are already there. So there's a big pro here would be to simply continue this because people are aware of these APIs. They've already used them. So I'm not very happy with it. This API is not ideal in my opinion, but it is already there. So it does kind of make sense to maybe do that. I've got a slightly alternative version below if we want to break it. There's no break because there's no API at the moment, but to do something that's not going to be compatible with the existing ones. What I don't like about this API, I'll just say, so there's save, rollback, and release. Nowhere does it say that it's a save point in the API itself, except for the parameter name, which is not ideal. That's one point. Another point that is somewhat weird, release as an operation is something that has practically no side effects. So all it does is release server resources, and it does prevent you from rolling back to a save point which you've created. That method ideally would behave like dispose, so it would not throw any exception. This is a little bit important since once a transaction is already completed in some way, then releasing a save point in that transaction should not throw. It would make it would require users to basically handle exceptions in places which are kind of awkward and unnatural. In the same way, transactions, when you dispose them, the dispose will always just not do anything like dispose is supposed to be, even if their connection has already been closed or broken or whatever. So I would ideally, I'm mixing up several subjects here, but if I were to design this from scratch, maybe we would have something called begins or start save point that returns an iDisposable, which has a rollback on it and which you can then dispose with absolutely no exceptions. I was myself kind of not completely sure. I still lean towards this API because it's consistent with the current APIs. It's very simple and we can give guidance that release shouldn't throw. I think that's more or less it. Another open point, there's a feature flag there. Our save point supported is its current name, which I'm sure some people here are going to hate. The point is basically to provide some sort of way for people to check in advance whether the provider supports this feature or not. Otherwise, they can't know. I think that's about it. I hope that was fast.
So I have a quick question. So how does this relate to transactions? So is this kind of like named transactions then?
It's within transactions. So transactions have no name in SQL, but transaction save points within a transaction do have a name because there can be several.
So basically, should I think of this like kind of like a logically within a transaction you do operations, right? Insert, update, delete, and then at some point I say where does when do I actually give it a name?
So at some point, let's say you've done some operations, some updates, and now you want to basically just do a checkpoint or a save point because you're going to be doing stuff, and you may want to roll back because you might encounter an error. Very typical situation that we have in EF Core, I've been working on this recently, is you're about to start like a complex operation, and there might be some unique key constraint violations there or something, some sort of error. So you can establish a save point, and you run forward, and in case there was an error, you can go back to where you were before you started this chunk, this kind of batch of operations, so to speak, without deleting those that were before.
So basically, let's say I do operation A, B, and C, then I say save async, and then I do DEF, and then I can say roll back to that save point, and then I'm basically back to where only ABC happened?
Exactly.
I see. And then what's the difference between rollback and release?
So rollback actually reverts the state of the transaction as if you didn't do DEF, whereas release removes the save point, but it retains the changes that you've done since that save point. It basically is, so SQL Server doesn't implement it, so it's not a necessary operation. All it does is release all server database resources associated with that save point, so you can no longer roll back to it. That's all it does.
At the end, SQL just does it a no-op, so that means release will not throw, but you can still go roll back to that even though you released it.
So SQL Server doesn't implement this operation. There's no SQL you can send to that will succeed. So it simply is not implemented. You can't do it. So this is also why in this proposal you can see it's a no-op by default.
Right. So it will not throw it. It just means that you didn't release any resources either.
Exactly.
Does it make sense from an object model to do a named rollback or release, or would it make more sense that let's call it save, return an object that has the verbs rollback and release? Because it seems weird that you would want to keep passing in a name instead of tracking the state in something like a using statement.
So I absolutely agree, and that's exactly the point I was talking about before. We could consider having a DB save point which has rollback on it. It doesn't necessarily have to have release because that would be disposed, in my opinion. That's how I would model this as an API.
Mm-hmm.
However, so the reason I'm not proposing this is that it's already an API that sort of exists on two providers, and we could say that it's valuable to keep it. I'm also not sure that this justifies introducing like a new DB save point thing, which is like another type, another concept. It's maybe a little bit heavyweight for this kind of light API, which, I'm just not sure it justifies it from a modeling point of view.
What are the restrictions on the names? Are there
That's
any?
going to be database specific for sure.
But
it's a string basically, but a database specific kind of restriction.
Yeah, and it's supposedly unique within your session or something, right? Or within your transaction.
Exactly, within a transaction it would be unique, yeah.
Can the names be meaningfully used outside of these APIs, or if we auto-generated a name for you, would that be just fine?
So if somebody is coding against this, they could use those names for themselves to keep track. So they could have several save points, and they could use them to, kind of have meaningful names just to track which save point is which. So I do think it makes sense to expose this. I don't want to hide, this kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's especially problematic if, there are syntax rules that are provider specific, because then we would have to have a provider specific generate name method kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In ADO.NET in general, I usually just try to expose things rather than try to build, all kinds of functionality above it, which encapsulates, the direct SQL thing. This is a direct reflection of the SQL commands.
I mean, it makes sense to me. I mean, like we could even, if we eventually find out that all the people want like a DB save point type, we could build that on top of these APIs, right? They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. We would just have a new method that wouldn't be virtual because it would just be implemented itself over the other ones. That would be like begin save point or something. That would give you back a DB save point, and then that would do the thing for you.
For the sake of discussion, that we rename save to create save point. And well, that's already the name that you would want for create save point. So, I mean, while it can be written in terms of the existing API, it would end up with a weird name just to make it so that the return type could change.
Well, I don't think you would do that. You would probably have literally like a begin method, because that's normally the pattern that AD.NET has, right? Isn't it a begin transaction or something?
On DB connection, you have begin transaction. So here it could be, I would tend to call it create save point personally.
Fair enough.
Because a transaction and a save point are not exactly the same or whatever. But I do agree that if we do think in the future that we might want to add a DB save point, it's better to do this now rather than end up with 2 save point APIs and, you know.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't know, like from a pure coding standpoint, like passing around strings is not great because they're like, you know, primitive types, so you don't actually know what it represents. Which is kind of what you would have to do in order to make that workable, right? I mean, I don't know exactly what coding looks like, but with transactions, you almost always span multiple methods usually. So I don't know whether this is also the case for save points or whether they're just within the local body of something, and then I guess you don't. Yeah, I guess transactions are different because you don't have to enlist in things and stuff, right? But because you would just basically say save async, give it a name, and then for transactions you would just begin it and then you would pass it around to actually enlist commands into it. But I guess for these kinds you would just say within the current transaction start, you know, save the save point, and then call some other methods, and then eventually maybe in a catch handler do rollback async or something. So maybe you don't pass them around. So if you don't pass them around, I guess it's fine if they're just local variables. But as soon as you find yourself passing these around, I think bare strings are not great from an API standpoint.
So I think there are definitely scenarios where a save point is going to be passed around if the user application is sufficiently complex or whatever. The difference, one difference between transactions and save points is at the SQL level, one is named and the other isn't. So transactions have no name. There is no such idea. We could say that DB transaction can be passed around representing a transaction, and the string can be passed around representing the save point. But yeah, I mean your point is, I agree, it's not ideal.
So who is providing these APIs already? Like
two providers at the moment. There's SQL client, and except for the release one, and then there's NPG SQL. And there's interest, so there's already Bradley Granger from MySQL that I think he even maybe possibly already implemented this. But anyway, a lot of interest in SQLite, again, with Bryce from the EF team who's managing that. So that would also go in for 5.0.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I would argue that to me it makes no difference whether we do it now or whether we do it later, because it seems our most popular provider already has save and rollback methods anyway. So like no matter what we do right now, we would always have a save and rollback method for you know SQL Server and Postgres, right?
I mean, we could say that the system data standard, I'm devil's advocate here mostly, introduces the new things, and then, you know, NPG SQL and SQL client would have to implement them, which I don't see would be a big problem because they would internally implement the same thing that you suggested. They would implement in the future as a shim or whatever you want. So
yeah, I guess my point is just, it's almost, you know, most people will not code against the abstraction would be my guess, right? So that means most people would still see create save point and save and rollback, right? And I mean, there's nothing we can do about that.
I don't think that's true. I think most people will be coding against a DB transaction and not against directly a SQL transaction. I mean, don't you think that's the case, Shai? I mean, most of the time when you're writing AD.NET code, because you usually have to explicitly cast things unless you're creating them in certain ways.
So I can check this, but if you're coding against SQL connection, which is I think what people are doing, then you know it overrides.
But even SQL connection, if you create it from the provider factory, you get back DB connection and you have to cast it. Like I don't see people using, you know, we did the analysis of this also for Microsoft Data SQL Client and System Data SQL Client, and most people are not using the SQL APIs directly. Most people are going to be using the basic APIs and then casting to the SQL object when they need to.
Interesting, because I've never done that. I almost always had new SQL connection, new SQL command in my code, and I never ever bothered with the abstractions. But maybe I'm an outlier. I mean, to
So
me,
always
for
done the
example,
opposite.
anybody using EF, for example, or getting to these objects that are part of EF are definitely not going to see any of the SQL things.
sure, yeah.
Um,
If you use an OR mapper, then you're also not very likely to call these APIs. I
Yeah,
guess these
so-
ones you may actually call because they actually control safe behavior.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
think-
So this is these. Yes, we expose DB transaction directly off EF, for example.
Right.
Gotcha.
Though what I would say is if you're using EF, then we already have APIs inside EF which expose at a higher level, which expose SafePoint
Agreed.
functionality. So you won't necessarily access these. And I think, I don't know, from what I've seen, if you're not using EF, so you're coding directly against, SQL client, I tend to usually, people don't really care about DB provider factory because why would they, right? So they do.
Agreed.
They use SQL connection, and if you have a SQL connection and you do begin transaction, what you get back is a SQL transaction. So there's that
Yes.
pattern as well, that at least if you've gone provider specific, you're going to stay provider specific all the way, at least this part.
I mean, honestly, I still think we should keep the same API in both places. Anyway, I don't think we should make system data different. I'm just not convinced that it's correct to say the majority of people are going to be using this through their SQL API. The research we've done in the past indicates that people don't do that. They much more commonly use the base types.
Fair enough.
Obviously, if you're knocking up something quickly against SQL Server and you're just to create SQL connection directly, then you're going to get this just by the fact of doing that. But I don't think that's the common pattern for most people.
Yeah, so then basically what you're saying is like we should make up our mind now then whether we want to have an object or not. I mean, I personally would say like I don't think having both would be terrible.
Yeah.
I think that's not the end of the world. I mean, if we really, really wanted to, we could also hide the save and roll back APIs if we think the create SafePoint API is better. But I don't know. To me, like with an ADO.NET, like I think begin SafePoint or create SafePoint that actually gives you an object back seems more idiomatic than passing around strings.
So
Right, like
another point on this is that it's not that we've seen lots of customers clamoring to be able to do this at the ADO.NET level.
Fair enough.
This proposal didn't come about through that route. It came about through a specific issue in EF Core that caused us to, Shy basically to go and analyze that and say, hey, if we use save points here in EF Core, basically you call save changes once, it fails, we roll back to the last save point, so it's nice. That's what we did, and then we saw, okay, we're doing this in EF Core, but two providers already have this at the ADO.NET level. Should we not have a common abstraction rather than abstracting it purely in EF Core? And so that's where this came about. So it's not like I don't know that it matters too much what this is like from a customer perspective, because we haven't really been, it's not something that I think in trying to write what's new in the Preview 8 release or Preview 7 release today. Shai and I had a big conversation basically about how do I show something that's meaningful and shows how this is useful, and it's quite difficult. It's pretty advanced case to get into. You can't write 3 lines of code and say this is how it's useful. So that also means though that I think we're free if we want to do something new on ADO.NET and not follow what's in there, because I don't think we'll be hugely impacting loads of customers in a way that will confuse them either.
I mean, in order to minimize the amount of work really that any providers do, what I would do is, so I guess what I suggest is that we have like create save point returns a DB save point that stores the transaction and its name, and then we leave a virtual rollback save point and virtual release save point on DB transaction that accept the name like they do right now, just in case this is anybody's preferred model, and then the object just calls those. So the DB save point would have no virtual members because it's just calling back to the things on the transaction that created it. And so it's just tying together the string and the transaction so that you can just use it in the using statement and everything looks nice. And then you have the rollback as a zero argument method of like, if you hit it, you just call rollback and you're done.
So you're saying basically implement both now?
Yeah. And so if somebody wants to just use strings, they'd call create save point and they'd ignore the result. That's the same as being void, except it used the A register.
So that does create a decision point for people, right? So now they have to understand that in order to use it. They have to they'll have to understand that calling save point name is the same and it's not different from doing it the other way. So I don't know that makes a better pit of success than just having one way to do it. Like creating decision points like that often makes things more difficult for people to use.
Maybe. I feel like most people would see create save point returning a thing and that has verbs on it, and then they would stop looking at the other things. And then the docs could certainly on rollback save point say it's primarily intended for infrastructure. You're expected to use the DB save point. But
that's not my experience of helping customers over the years. It's much more common that they'll ask a question, why is this returning this and these are there? What's the difference between calling this one and doing that? I don't understand why when I'm supposed to use this instead of use that. That's what I would expect the feedback to be.
So I mean, the actual work to save providers isn't very significant. I'd just implement this and also do a PR to SQL client, I guess. It's no big deal. If we really feel like we'd like to have the nice API, then I would say let's just go with that rather than also do save and you know.
The advantage of this API is it's exactly the same as what providers have. As soon as we make it different, I think we lose the value of this API, and we should just do what we think is right.
I tend to agree. So, I mean, if we do like a begin transaction that returns something, then that's already a new API because then we don't have save. And I would also mention that there's no async, by the way. At the moment, if you look in SQL client, you don't have save async. So in any case, you know, a new API is required here. So if we feel like, you know, we're not happy, we're really unhappy with you know, what we're seeing on SQL client and NPG SQL, then I guess we can just introduce a new thing.
I mean, here's another question. So like we already have save and rollback, right? So the new ones would be virtual, which means the other ones would have to override them, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does that work with versioning? So
the way I've done this up to now is cross-target, of course.
No, I meant
right,
like
but this transaction rollback is not transaction rollback; it's save point rollback, right?
Right.
So this rollback has nothing to do with the existing rollback. So everything is new methods.
No. Because SQL transaction that derives from DB transaction has a public method rollback, and it will then hide the method that's here, assuming the one on SQL transaction isn't virtual. Well, it will hide anyway because it won't override, which will obviously be a compile time warning, which most people treat as an error. So when they rebuild SQL client, they'll see an error. Binary compat should be fine, right? Because it will bound to the right method for everything that's already existing. When they rebuild, they should be able to put override instead, and then I believe everything will remain compatible.
I mean, like it just creates this weird thing, right? So they already exist today, right? There's already a method called save with a string and rollback with a string on SQL. I don't know, is it System SQL or is it Microsoft SQL?
Both.
I see. So either way, so now you are basically in .NET Core, let's say 3.1, right? And you're using SQL fine, and now you're upgrading from .NET 3.1 to .NET 5. Well, we made them virtual, but they're still using the same Microsoft SQL package, right? They haven't upgraded that package yet, so that thing doesn't override it, right? So they're basically still calling the method, and now it basically depends whether the call side is statically bound to DB transaction or whether it's statically bound to SQL transaction, whether that actually does anything, right? Because I supposedly our base implementation would throw not supported and return false from our save point supported, and which now means until they get a version of SQL provider that actually supports it, like they will get somewhat odd behavior depending on the static call side. But I guess there's nothing we can do about that either, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like to me, the existing APIs also have downsides too, right?
Yeah. So this is just the common case of how adding a new public method to an unsealed class can be a breaking change in some sense.
Yeah.
But usually we're okay with that because it's not binary compat breaking.
Right.
And if the thing that is going to use, or the things that are going to be using it need to be rebuilt on top of it in order to work correctly. But usually that's actually okay in cases like this because the behavior is the same in both cases. So, but you're correct that to get full compatibility, it requires Microsoft Data SQL Client to release a new version. And that's certainly an advantage of not copying the existing API surface.
So one question I have is, so like, let's say we, no matter what we do, whether we do new virtuals or whether we do the bring a brand new method, presumably SQL is committed to update theirs, right?
Yeah.
Are they doing it for both system and Microsoft or just Microsoft?
No, system data SQL client is I think it's in some sort of in a maintenance mode, so they're definitely doing security and and all that, but I don't think they're in a state where they're introducing new APIs, but I can't really speak for them, so I might be wrong.
But they may have to for this one because effectively we're breaking them.
Yeah, it seems like they already have the feature, right? All they have to do is just, instead of saying public void save, they would have to say public override void save, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
that seems kind of like a reasonable ask, so that things just compose.
Yeah. I think it's reasonable. That's why I don't think it's blocking that. But again, it all depends on how much we think moving this API forward and making it the common one on system data is the right way to go versus doing a new API which doesn't currently exist on system data.
Yeah.
And therefore, if we still leave the ones that are in the providers, you can still cast the SQL client, or if you're using it, or SQL transaction, or if you're using it directly, you can still use the old ones. But then maybe this is another reason to do a different API in here, so we don't have the compat issue with adding a new virtual method.
Yeah, it's definitely another argument.
I mean, honestly, I would probably just go with Shai's proposal here, and then the only thing I would suggest is I would probably rename our SavePoint supported to just support SavePoints.
I knew you'd say that.
I don't know, it seems weird. But like, other than that, I think
I
it
don't
seems
think
fine.
anyone
to me.
likes the R
Singular.
except Shy.
It would have been is something supported, but because it's plural, then we don't like the R. How come? Anyway, that's
Well, we also don't like is so either, right? Like, we generally don't use them. I think WPF has them everywhere for Boolean properties, but virtually no other API has none that. It is somewhat rare.
yeah. Arthur told me like 99% when I first did this that it's not gonna fly.
Yeah, I mean, the is and are usually is just if you have a, just a noun or an adjective. But since you're using supported, there's an easy verb there, which is supports, and so that has a better verb, so it's better self-description, which is really where the thing comes from. Because it'd be like, if it was something of, is this, saved, does it save to disk or not, and it's a state of an object, you'd be like, is persisted, right? And like, there's no other verb than is, it's just describing its state of being. So
So are we saying we're going to do what's basically suggested with that rename?
Yeah, I would do that. Like, and yeah. That's all I have to say, I guess.
okay.
I mean,
like I'll say I don't really, or it's been a while since I've used any of these APIs, but to me, save taking a string feels like saving a file, and it's not saving a file, it's creating a save point, which you need to now ask our save or supports save points before you can know whether or not it's safe to call it, and the things aren't related in any way other than documentation. So
Right.
I actually think this is pretty weak, but I do buy the argument of it's what people are already using.
Yeah, that to me is the bigger argument. It's like, how recent are these APIs, by the way?
super old.
Very old.
Okay, so then I think,
From
yeah,
the
the
start.
older they are, the stronger the argument is for prior art.
That's basically why I went through the exact same kind of hesitation, and that's what I came up with.
I mean, usage is low, though.
It is.
I'm just looking at usage
Usage is
stats, and it's like less than 1%. I mean, in fairness, though, like, I don't have a lot of... Let me actually just open up all of the stuff here. Yeah, even the NetOfX Compat Lab, it's like less than 1%. So it's... At least rollback and save are in the same ballpark. That leads me to believe people are using these APIs correctly.
You shouldn't see any release at all because it doesn't exist.
Yeah,
SQL client.
there's no release. Yeah, it's still like, I mean, prior art is a thing, and I mean, I buy the argument of not polluting the root namespace with more stuff that is esoteric. You know, as Jeremy pointed out, like somewhat weakly typed API, but like I think to me that's fine within the vicinity of what this feature is for. It seems like an advanced thing, and I mean the nice thing is, yeah, I guess rollback is an overload to the other rollback on transaction, but then save is kind of net new because there's no save transaction, right? It's just commit transaction.
Correct.
But yeah,
I think one of the real benefits of doing this is actually like like I said, the feature we've put in EF Core, which uses rollbacks, that will, again, it's fairly advanced, but then it will be used. And then now at the moment we have that implemented in our different providers explicitly in EF Core, but by putting this at the abstraction layer, then things like ORMs, like EF Core, can now use this API. And when somebody, Oracle, for example, bring up their ADO provider, they don't then have to implement this in EF because it just uses this under the cover. So this is kind of like building on the existing, you know, abstraction level that is in system data, and most of that is going to be used in the ecosystem by people using Dapper or EF or something else above it, where this actual API doesn't matter too much because you know, it's coded in one place by somebody who knows what they're doing, you hope.
right.
I mean, Shai and I kind of have different opinion on system data about whether we should encourage people to use it on its own at all. But,
Yep.
What is your opinion on this?
my opinion, I think you either use Dapper or use EF or something, and the times that you need to actually drop down to use system data are, you're probably doing it wrong, to be honest, or you're very advanced and have very specific reasons. Shai is a little less extreme on that.
Since Arthur has been allowed to say his opinion, I'm going to say mine.
That escalated quickly.
The reason Dapper exists is because system data has not
exactly
evolved gracefully, which I do get the, you know, the argument, but every other language out there, you look at, you know, you look at Python, you look at JDBC, like a major thing that languages provide is a database API, and, you know, .NET has it, but it's not ideal. So I just think we should do what we can to make it better, basically. That's all. Without breaking the world.
Right.
I still think we should prioritize, like, you know, features blocking performance on ADO.NET rather than usability. But at some point, I would be very happy if we could also improve usability.
Totally fair.
I'm gonna argue with that.
Yeah, nobody would argue with like improving usability.
No, exactly.
Well,
it's just all a function of how much time do we have. All right, so then this is what I have. Let me know whether you disagree with anything I said.
Are you showing something?
Yes. Do I not?
I don't see it.
I just see the top comment still.
same.
Yeah, me too.
OBS shows my comment. Teams.
Are you sharing just the window?
Let me share the. Well, I was sharing the whole window, yeah, but like. I clicked it. Nothing happens. Teams, do it. Come on, you can do it. Seriously?
Well, I mean, I'm seeing it on my end. If we wanna, anyway.
I see it on YouTube.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening with Teams. Right now I can't even share, apparently. Yeah, I don't know what's happening here.
Your comment matches the discussion, at least my understanding of it.
There's just support save points, which needs to be a property rather than a field. And default.
That's probably a good idea. We don't have this thing called virtual fields, although sometimes that might have been useful. Alrighty, then I think we can call this a day then for this one.
Cool. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Absolutely. Always a
I know
pleasure.
it's super busy.
All right, then let's look at the systemd console and JSON console number 39631, which in a civilized world I could present my screen, but like apparently really it's not sharing it. I need to stop clicking on this, I think. Wait, can anybody see the issue? At least on GitHub directly.
I can see it in GitHub, yes.
Alrighty, so then Miriam, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, in this screen share, I cannot see it, but anyways, so basically it's just the two overloads. One is the two overloads. One is add JSON. Sorry, I get these pings. One is the add JSON console. The other one is add systemd. They basically, as I put it in the description of the issue, if the user wants to get the default properties, they would have to have this empty lambda, and but instead just adding those two basically APIs. I think I was hoping maybe this is like a very straightforward API. What do you think? Or just
It looks straightforward to me. Do we need an add simple console without an action as well?
So basically, if they don't provide it, there are a bunch of properties for like the JSON format or systemd format. Like the booleans would be false, the strings would be empty, and all of that. But it still would work, and like they don't absolutely require to set things up. And especially now because it's a new feature and everything, if people want to just try it out, they might be confused to see like why do they need to provide an action, but then they'll just try these overloads most probably, yeah, basically there are other ways they could be doing the same thing and like setting everything up, and that's by saying add console, and then in the configure of add console they would say the formatter name is either JSON or systemd. So there are other ways of doing it, but it just made sense to have another overload that just doesn't take the configure lambda, because add console itself has an overload that doesn't take.
Right. I feel like Corey's question, and if it wasn't, it's my question now, is there's two add consoles, there's now two add JSON console, and there's two add systemd console, but there's only one add simple console.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize, thanks. So basically the reason is, and I put it on the description of the issue, is that add simple console, if it didn't have the configure, it would act exactly as add console. So add system console without the configure would act exactly as add console. So that's why I thought maybe it won't be, yeah, we could add that too, but I thought maybe it would not have value.
I mean, do the users understand that calling add console without an action is just equivalent to calling add simple console?
The name, I'm not sure. This simple console used to be called default before, and like we decided on the add simple console name, but it basically the docs say that add simple console just adds a default console. If they kind of read the docs in that sense, they might kind of get to the conclusion that add simple console without the configure is basically the same thing as add console. But I see the confusion there, probably. Open to suggestions too. So.
Yeah, I think the two that you're adding are good. I would just consider adding an add simple console, even if it just forwards to the add console.
Sure.
It would probably be a little helpful to users.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt. Doesn't hurt, sure.
So the suggestion is to add an add simple console overload as well that doesn't take a configure, right?
Yes. And with these calls also, because it's not recommended, but like if someone were to add one after another, usually the last one wins. So if someone says builder.add simple console, add systemd console, add JSON console, like basically the last one gets picked. Sure, yeah, we could add the add simple console as you mentioned. Sorry.
Cool, then let me just... We should also add without configure just for consistency. All right. Yeah, again, you can't see what I typed, but like you can browse to it. Hopefully everybody agrees with what I wrote.
Okay, yep.
Looks correct.
All right, then one down as well. And now we are onto mine, which hopefully is also fast. So it's in the designs repo. It's number 142. It is basically an update to the thing we already approved last time. Let me just project what I have. I guess probably the markdown view is better because I can see the comments. And by we, I mean me. So we have effectively two problems here. One of them is when I ran this. So basically what I did is I ran this tool that I wrote a few years ago over our binaries for .NET Core. And then I basically found all the APIs that the whole platform not supported, right? And we already audited that. And that was basically my input into which API should we mark as being Windows specific. And then what I ended up doing is I reran this again .NET 5 to make sure that it's inconsistent with the current bits, and very few things changed. And then I noticed that a few days later when I redid the same analysis for Blazor that I fucked up and I didn't actually clear my output folder. So basically what I was running against was still .NET Core 3.1, not .NET 5. And so this PR is basically actually doing it against .NET 5, and it's based on Preview 6, I believe. And so we probably should update this at some point as well, but it's basically capturing a bunch of new types that we haven't had before. So, for example, arc iterator was captured. What Jan pointed out is that arc iterator in principle could work. We just haven't done the work to make it work cross-platform, which means now implementation is Windows only, but that's more happenstance versus in Mono is actually supported. So we could take the stance that we just mark it for now as being Windows specific because that's actually what's happening. But then if in a later release we mark it cross-platform, then it's kind of annoying if everybody already wrote code that, basically makes it work, right? And then now you have to like undo all of this code, and that seems weird. So my suggestion would be arc iterator. We just ignore this one as an oddity right now, especially because this type is effectively only used by 5 people in the world, and these people who already do it, they know what they're doing usually, because it's basically for unsafe code when you navigate the underscore arc list thing, right?
But we marked system directory services and system directory services account management as Windows only, and there are definitely people now that system directory services protocols or whatever works cross-platform that they'll probably be trying to make those other libraries work cross-platform. So either we're only marking things if they're permanently single platform, or we're marking things based on the state they were in the release. And I don't think that we should be mixing the policies unless there's like an active PR that might make it for 5.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I guess like my question is just like for things like Arc Iterator, like it's not really an API, right? I mean, it's kind of like a type system handshake between the runtime and the code, which is very different from, let's say, an actual API like a directory services thing or something, right? So that's, this one, I don't know, like I guess I can go either way. I'm fine with marking it for now, marking the whole type as Windows specific and then relaxing that in later release. I mean, all 3 people in the world who use this API will be very happy. But like directory services, I think, is way more popular than this one.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be inclined to say our default position based on what we think we want to do for the directory services stuff is we mark it for whatever's true in the release. And when someone gets around to implementing our Iterator on a non-Windows platform, they can, well, hopefully they do it on all of them, because we don't have this notion of it works on 2 platforms. At least I don't think we do.
We sort of do, but we don't want to, right? Yeah.
We don't support not one. We support inclusive policies only, I think. Anyway, so update the attributes for that release, because it would be the case that if you're referencing this type from a 5 build, it'll be like, hey, I think this is platform specific, and yeah, maybe you're actually running on a 6 runtime, and it works, but for the purposes of the analyzer, it's like this probably isn't going to work. Seems correct. So
the problem with that is the only problem is we cannot really tell people that they now have superfluous platform checks. We could in principle do that, but we need to be careful that it's not super noisy. I mean, you could imagine a case where if you have a guard and then nothing you call under the guard is actually platform specific for the platform you're guarding for, then we give you a, well, you're doing this guarding for no reason kind of thing. But that might be tricky.
Sure, but again, that assuming that people land directory services account management for 6, that's going to be true for that as well. And as you mentioned, it's probably far more popular.
Yeah, and I'm not saying this for Arc Iterator. I'm saying this as a general thing, right?
Right.
That is the downside. But yeah, I should probably think about this in the spec, what that means. All right, so then the other thing that showed up was SQL types. So we have SQL file stream, which I'm not sure why that's Windows only. Arthur or Shai, do you have any idea why this would be Windows only?
I don't think they're still here.
Oh.
I believe SQL file stream uses like file system.
That explains why my sharing also doesn't work, because my Teams is frozen.
Yeah, your Teams view is frozen in YouTube. I don't know if anybody, I don't know what the experience was when I also hit share, but I'm sharing the YouTube so that everybody else can, at least on a delay, see what the internet sees.
Which is funny though. The only person that I see is still moving is Corey. Everybody else is frozen.
I don't see anyone else's video other than mine.
Yeah, I guess the other ones are frozen by choice. Yeah, I don't know why they would throw platform not. I mean, like basically, I will find it because somebody threw platform not supported in the implementation.
I mean, it needs to participate in a transaction between SQL and the file system, so it might be doing some weird Windows-specific things. It makes sense to me.
Right. Yeah, I think that's fine. So, yeah, OldDB, we should probably mark the entire assembly because I don't think OldDB is supported anywhere else. Because literally every single type shows up here. Still scrolling. For system.drawing, we have font converter plus name converter. So that seems.
You passed up system diagnostics.
Oh yeah, there's one in the middle. Yeah, kill on process.
Do we not support killing processes outside of Windows?
We don't support the one with the boolean apparently. So there's kill, which is the current one. Yeah, I guess we can't walk the process tree on Linux. Or we didn't bother to.
Okay.
There's one thing I hate with GitHub is that I always keep pressing the wrong button when I want to add a single comment and I start a review. I also think it's weird that I cannot reject my own proposal. It's like, no, you can only comment on it. You cannot take it back. System drawing. All right, so font converter. An image converter, I don't know why they are Windows specific. Because we support image, right? So I guess font maybe we don't, but like I guess we need to actually ask the WinForms people to take a look at this. Will probably be a good idea. Yeah, so system.io file encrypt and decrypt makes sense. I think there are Windows features for, or specifically NTFS features even. System.io pipes. Like, does anybody remember, like, why did we put anonymous pipe server echo not in a net new assembly?
I'm guessing the access rights or security handle stuff here is Windows specific.
Yeah.
I think we support pipes via Unix domain sockets on Linux, don't we?
We do, but in the past when we have added these new types that are echo specific, we usually did it so that we can move it to a different assembly. Otherwise, it would have just exposed the constructors on the types themselves.
Okay.
But it's possible that I just didn't see the assembly. Yeah, I guess sound player, system sound, they all make sense. They're just wrapping Win32 APIs. No surprises there. I would mark the entire types because it doesn't make much sense in my opinion to mark the individual APIs on that one. Yeah, socket and ping. I don't know networking well enough. Like, I assume ping is generally cross-platform except for the send.
Yeah, but some of the ping APIs require admin because we just call the ping executable. I'm not sure why the safe socket handle constructor on socket would be Windows specific, but
well, it might not be, right? Like, basically the way the tool works is like if you have a tool platform not supported anywhere in the method or in the, up to 5 levels deep, I will throw. So it's possible that just some kinds of handles will cause that to blow up.
Okay, that makes sense.
But
Yeah, I don't know if that should be there.
Yeah. I'd say same for the ping. There are cases, as Corey mentioned, based on the admin, some information might not be available. So it depends on how you run it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's not available at all.
So what about the socket information one?
That one is Windows specific.
Okay. God damn it, I did it again. Fucking hate this. God damn
That
it.
is the cloning socket from socket information, right, Corey?
Yeah.
And I think, yes, that's Windows specific.
And duplicate and close.
I looked at it a while ago, and now since we have the handle, we could possibly sort of fake it or implement it, because the socket information can put random stuff into it, like the handle itself, if you really choose to. But
yeah, but for right now, it's Windows specific.
Yeah.
We can always remove it from this list if we add support
Yeah.
later. And duplicate and close is also Windows specific.
Are there actually two, or is there just one that takes an int?
I believe there's just one. I'm not.
And it's the one that takes an int, right?
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. God. Yeah, some interrupt services stuff, com event info, com events helper. Yeah, sounds like they're Windows only. I can buy that. X509 certificate UI. I suppose it just called the Win32 API to show a dialog or something.
Yep.
So then the whole type should be marked.
Yeah. I mean, given a million years and success of Maui, we could probably make it work cross-platform, but currently there's no intention to do so.
I think your
So just
estimates
mark the whole type.
might be slightly pessimistic here. I have literally no idea what this is. XAML access level, but like that sounds WPF specific, so I can buy that these don't work. Yeah, all the VB ones I've pinged Jared. I probably have to ping him again. So for those who don't know, like Microsoft Visual Basic is this ginormous wrapper DLL around like half the BCL, because they had this my feature at some point that basically allowed you to say things like my.computer.filesystem.rename or something like that. And so I can buy that some of them would throw, but I have to say some of them don't make sense to me. Like daytime, for example, should just work, right? Maybe not set today, because I assume that would change the system time. But like,
Yeah, there's also like renaming on the file system.
yeah, but file.move works, right? I mean, I don't know why that would. I guess.
Right.
Yeah, I guess some of the rename stuff might actually use the what's it called, the save rename that Windows has, where they, write to a shadow copy file and then swap them or something, right? But doesn't seem like it. Yeah, interaction I can buy. Strings I don't understand why that would be Windows specific. I mean, seems like we should be able to compare strings across platforms. And then same with these guys here, file system, like the vast. I mean, the UI option ones I can see, because I think the UI ones, yeah, they would have like, I think the UI one is using the shell APIs to show a progress bar, so those wouldn't work. But everything else seems fine. I mean, like copy directory should work, right?
I mean, it's possible that the base copy directory is just calling the UI option one, so it also wouldn't work because it doesn't have the implementation for it.
That's probably true. Yeah, probably what ends up happening is they call the other ones and say UI option none. And then I guess the UI option none is probably saying if none call shell APIs, else call the actual shell APIs, and then the shell APIs throw. And so the whole method is now marked as platform specific. So probably the ones that don't take UI options still work by the way the code paths are actually executed. But my tool is not smart enough to detect that. Yeah, that would make sense. All right, so we'll make some modifications here based on the comments, and then I think we can consider this approved with feedback.
Yeah, it looks like Jan left a comment that the arg iterator is supported on a non-Windows in 5, but it requires the mono runtime.
Oh, I see now. I thought... So basically you're saying when .NET 5 ships because we ship the mono runtime in some areas still? Well, no, not really. Right? We don't ship the mono runtime as part of .NET 5, do we?
Yeah.
What
Mono as like Mono's CLR as a substitute for core CLR. That's what's driving AOT, I think.
Right, but we don't ship any AOT platform of .NET 5, right? Because the WebAssembly one is moving to the WebAssembly one, right? And that one will not work anyways, so that wouldn't matter. And so the only AOT one that we have is iOS, and we don't ship that in 5, right? We punted all the Xamarin work. But yeah, I guess that's the problem, right? So as soon as we have two runtimes and one supports it and one doesn't, it's a bit of a... Then at that point, we would just say it's a false negative, right?
Yeah, so I don't have a super strong opinion on the specific one, given that it's in a confusing state, but I do think that we effectively, with directory services, made the decision that we're stamping what the current release looks like and not what forward looks like. So I'll let that one be a PR issue, and as in pull request, not public relations, instead of a policy decision here.
All right, so then I guess now we are back to other things we could take a look at. So I have no idea who's on the call right now, but like I would suggest we just skip the binary formatter one because I think Levi was not sure whether there's anything to review left. And then I would just focus on the 6.0 ones and then see where this leads.
Yeah, I mean, from core, I think it's just Yumi and Corey.
Everybody else already dropped off?
Yeah, I see Yumi, Corey, Tomas, and Miriam as the only ones still in the call.
Yeah, do we like we can just take a look because we have like 50 minutes now to actually see whether we can approve some things, and if we don't feel like it, then we don't. But
I feel like we have the minimum quorum.
we have the bare minimum.
We're skirting it.
But that's the time when we can approve a bunch of stuff.
That number. Yeah. Fair enough.
So console key info doesn't implement IEquatable. That seems kind of like a fairly non-brainer to me.
I can't remember what console key info is.
Console key info is it's basically just a struct holding onto like an enum and I think a char or something.
Yeah, it as a read-only. Yeah, so it's a read-only struct that's not following the read-only struct guidance. So it should make itself equatable. Like it even has the operator, the comparison or the equality comparison operators, it just doesn't implement I equatable of T. So yeah, it should.
Yeah, makes sense.
I don't think there's any. This wouldn't have any negative interaction with net standard, right? Adding interfaces to a struct isn't a breaking change across that contract boundary.
No, it's like any other API addition. It's like you just don't see it when you target down level.
Right. So it would as successfully if you were on Core 5, but you would see that it didn't implement it on standard. So yeah, it seems fine.
It will change which equals method a comparer will call. It would be crazy if the equals methods were not compatible, but yeah.
Yes, it might, but like I
think we can be
the
okay
current equals
there.
is implemented as return value is console key info and equals cast it to the so that's the equals object. So it's already
Okay,
it's
cool.
everything is there except for declaring that it conforms to the interface.
yeah,
So
that seems like a fairly safe thing to do. Oh yeah. Yeah. See, this is one of those things where I'm having trouble. Like on the one hand side, I can see why ASP.NET has that. On the other hand, I'm not sure the abstractions belong.
right. So yeah, I mean this one's going to be troublesome. Let's before we talk about this one, which we'll probably decide to punt until we have more people. Looks like chat suggested 319 or 9 or 6 as the same as console key info, but a different type. Just async flow controls a read-only struct that does everything except declare its I equatable of itself.
Works for me.
But yeah, so this issue, or yeah, the one with iSystem time is generically about mockability. Specifically, it's about having a mock wrapper for getting the current time. And I have some comments in there about how our current rules effectively say that we can't ever add that or we would never add that interface to the BCL. Granted, never just means we have to change the rules before we do so. But
when you say never, like, why would you say that?
It just involved a lot of like, okay, well, it's an iSystem time, but we don't like interfaces unless they need to be interfaces. So then it becomes, you know, like system time, and then now we have an object for getting the time. And somebody will be like, well, why can't I get the normal one? So give me the normal one. And then now there's a singleton, and now you have the singleton, which is just the same as datetime offset.utc now. And like in the end, it's like all we did was add a bunch of redundancy. Nothing in our universe is ever going to use it. This only exists for abstract things, and it's a hard problem. If we want to talk about it as just going in extensions, which may have been what the original proposal was, that'll be easier because it's already heavily interfaced and mocked.
Yeah, I think that's what it already is. Like to me, like the what you just said about state and objects, that makes sense to me. The interface, I think, here is less of an issue for me because usually the problem with the extension interfaces is that they're effectively modeling, you know, regular classes with a bunch of utilitarian methods on them. And that's an ever-growing bag of stuff, right? And that's why I don't like interfaces, because you totally want to add to that over time. But if you have an iSystem clock and the only thing you ever have is now effectively, I can buy that interface is stable, because you basically would say everything that actually deals with the datetime itself, you just get out of datetime offset, right? It just is kind of like IEnumerable, where basically you just, you know, get a numerator and everything else is somewhere else, right? So I think these are the interfaces I can actually buy as a concept. I can even buy the need for an interface here because you may want to implement this somewhere else. But I agree with you on the abstraction side of it, which is, yeah, as soon as you have a type like that, you want a current or a default, and then you're back to square one where everybody just calls the static one, and then you can't actually inject it. And that seems to me the bigger problem with that.
Right. But given it exists in all of the places listed in the issue.
Yeah.
The original issue here suggests adding it to Microsoft extension primitives. Somewhere in the middle, it was like David threw out the suggestion that really it should live in system, and then that's when it was like, well, the guidance says sort of no. It says indirectly no.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, like that. Yeah, this one here kind of says, okay, we screwed up, right? But I guess like
to be in an extensions library, but not BCL.
Yeah, I think they already shipped that though.
Shipped what?
This interface.
In the primitives package?
Was it? Yeah, because the comment was it's present in.
Yeah, it sounds like it's an internal
contracts.
interface.
It's not that internal. Like I just yesterday was deriving from some type in ASP.NET, and the constructor I had to provide for took an iSystem clock. I mean, maybe they put it in internal, but like it's certainly part of the the public API
So,
that you use. So like I'm not sure if you can actually change that.
Yeah, Microsoft Extensions caching abstractions exposes it via the namespace Microsoft Extensions internal. Kestrel Core exposes it from Kestrel Core internal infrastructure. Oh, sorry, that one's internal. ASP.NET Core authentication exposes a public iSystem clock. Yeah, so there are at least two public versions of it.
Oh, sorry. So they define their own iSystem clock. So authentication literally has an iSystem clock in Microsoft ASP.NET Core authentication.
Yeah,
that's great.
I don't think we have enough info for this because there's now a story of what happens to all the existing code. Are we just going to break compatibility with everyone?
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, so the proposal was there's already the public one from Microsoft Extensions caching abstractions and Microsoft ASP.NET Core authentication. Can we make one to unify them all? Whether that be actually unifying the types, which is hard, or the new use this one going forward type. But
yeah, I think we need buy-in from ASP before we do this.
Okay, so then execution context. Probably want Steven for this one would be my guess. Unless somebody has strong feelings on threading. Yeah, I would skip that.
Yeah.
System drawing color is possibly missing 8 colors. Well, possibly, or
I mean, there are a whole lot of named colors. Wikipedia page requires pushing page down many, many, many times.
I see. So like they took the CSS name colors as an input. Yeah, I don't personally care. I mean, they're just static data holders. Like that seems straightforward to me.
Isn't there already something called an Enum called console color? Why do they add it on non-color?
Well, the problem is there's two kinds, right? There's color, which is an actual RGB value, which has a bunch of static helpers that basically pre-populate them. And then there's known color, which is an enum, and that one is, I think, used by some of our infrastructure. Like I think it's the noun color table and noun color names, and yeah, that one is maybe more problematic.
Right. So dark gray, we have using the idiom that A is American and E is European. We have the American spelling, as in we spell it dark Gray.
I mean, I
I
personally don't
believe that
understand
the-
the whole tying between known color and color. What's happening here? GitHub now renders colors? That's fascinating.
Yeah, this change makes sense to me.
So your feedback is just the naming of gray, is that it?
Well, so it says that we're missing words here, but we have dark gray. We just spell it AY instead of EY, and we could add both because they're both CSS terms. But I don't. The like half of these,
Gotcha.
actually all but one, are grays, and and this may be a just spelling unification problem. We don't seem to have known color Rebecca purple.
Yeah, I mean, I will say though, I think Rebecca purple makes sense to me because that's a color we don't have. I'm not gung-ho about duplicating all the grays.
Yeah, I don't know what our...
Yeah, I don't feel strongly about it, but it would be nice. Like if we're trying to match CSS, then it'd be nice to match it, but I don't know if we're trying to match it here.
No, I
Right.
think they just, I mean, I guess it wasn't, I think, intended to literally match the names. I think it was just, well, you have a bunch of names, and what would you turn to determine named colors, right? And starting with CSS seems a reasonable starting point. It's just that the framework went with ENUS for spelling of identifiers, so I guess the CSS standard did not.
I think CSS just supports both and that they're aliases.
Oh, great. So that's like the web as we know and love
Right.
it.
It's the wonderful, how do you decide which spelling to use? Well, use both.
Yeah. So, what's the verdict then? I mean, to be honest, my verdict on this is if this would be string parsing, I would be okay with supporting both. If this is exposing literally like named enums and named fields, duplicating everything feels wrong to me. Like that seems in the vicinity of like
According to
duplicating.
APIs of .NET, there are 0 occurrences of GREY in .NET, and there are many GRAYs. So I think that this is just one of those, we have a framework spelling of gray and it uses an A. So we would say no to all of the grays. And
That's
then
fine.
if Rebecca purple is a color that we should add, then
Yeah,
we can add it.
that seems reasonable to me. Britain lost is the comment.
Well, I mean, it would be the same as saying that we should, alias every authorize with a Z to authorize with an S.
Or
and
color, right? Why do we have
and
color? We should also have
Yeah,
OU.
in fact, it's called known color, not known color, so we should use the American spelling of gray. Granted, I'm an American and I prefer the E. I'm just saying we should be consistent. So,
for better or worse, framework spelling is ENUS. Side note, Britain lost.
Are you still with us, Emo?
Yeah, I'm typing. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
The only activity right now is Corey's eyes as he's reading something.
When you're typing, nobody can hear you scream. All right, so then let me scroll all the way down. I assume since Jeremy is now sharing, you can see what I have, right?
Not yet.
Oh, because of delay.
Now you've scrolled, now you've pasted.
Yep, here we go.
Yep, looks good.
Yep.
All right. So we made some progress. Then let's see what we have here. There's more 6.0 stuff. I got these ones we just looked at. Never mind. Bind configuration extension methods for option builder. Who owns this stuff on our side? Is that Miriam as well? I suppose so, because this is
extensions.
Yes, I just let me check. Yeah, that's the one I actually just added. There was a conversation, but it's on a 6.0. I'm not sure if you guys are looking at 6.0.
Yeah, we only
well,
look at 6.0 because we're done with 5.0.
Okay, gotcha. There was, so basically I just followed the conversation in there. I haven't tried the sample or anything myself, but David also uploaded the API and they did review over a comment in GitHub.
I mean, I don't have strong opinions on this one. Like, if you want to take more time to actually take a look at it, that's totally fine. We can look at something else.
Sure.
I'm not...
Sure.
Like, looking at the existing overloads for bind, there's basically bind that takes options and configuration, and there's one that takes options, configurations, and configure builder. And this one would be a config path.
Yeah.
Interesting.
We could, yeah.
I mean, the API looks fine, but I'm not familiar enough with this.
And neither am I. Like, I mean, it basically looks like, so in the existing one, so there's basically one overload that takes a config, one that takes a config and the configure builder. And then this one would basically be config path and configure builder. I don't think I would make the configure builder optional, because that's already, I guess I would, because the existing configuration ones, basically so logically they want to add 2 new overloads, because the existing ones basically support binder and non-binder, but they both work off an configuration, and this one would basically do the same thing, except that it would work from a config path. And so instead of having 2 overloads, they would just have one where the binder is optional. That seems reasonable.
Yeah, it makes sense. I assume they want a config path for something.
Jeremy? I assume you were thinking. What did we lose, Jeremy?
Trying to find other APIs where we're adding a config path, but it's very hard to search through extensions.
The mute button on my headset and the mute button in Teams keep not sharing state. I had stepped away for a moment, but I heard you and Corey have agreement. I also heard you being conflicted, and then change your mind about the default. So I'll accept groupthink.
Does anyone say what the path is supposed to do? Oh, I see. So it's actually, yeah, so this is, given I just learned ASP.NET, I can actually talk to this. So the config path is not an actual path to disk. It's A:/B:/C, because you have, what ends up, you have a configuration file that is usually hierarchical, right? Where you have like, my business logic area, and then under the business logic area, I have a logging area, and under that I say the logging level, right? And so you would then say business logic : logging : level, right? And so this basically allows you to bind parts of the configuration to a particular T options type. And so options is basically their automatic serialization from the JSON configuration type into something strongly typed. Configuration is basically just a glorified dictionary accessor, versus options is just some .NET type that they deserialize the shit into.
Makes sense. Do you know if other builder.bind configuration methods support a config path?
Configuration is new. They had bind, but what was the question? If they have what?
So we're currently taking an iConfiguration. So we're saying user, you extract it for yourself, and this new overload is saying, give us the path, we'll extract it. Do we have other builders that support this same duality of taking a configuration versus taking a path?
I don't think so, because like options is very specific to this, right? Because normally when you take a configuration, you're just basically keying into that, but options is basically the strongly typed view over a configuration, right? So then I think that only makes sense for options, not for anything else.
Okay, this makes sense.
But yeah. I mean, personally, I'm not gung-ho about path, but because to me, path does sound like a file system path, but
Is it consistent with other API?
yeah,
the first time
sort of.
seen it in the...
So they used section name in other areas, but like section name usually is, as David pointed out, usually just effectively not a fully qualified path. It's usually just A. And then basically it means, the root property name A, that's the section. Versus in practice, that's often not the case, right?
So maybe, I mean, if it's normally section name and this one is that plus expecting you might do complicated hierarchy, then wouldn't it be section path? I mean, it's a section instead of config. If that makes no sense, then ignore me. But
yeah, section path I think makes more sense. I was trying to look up all of our XPath APIs to see what we're naming the strings there, and we just call it XPath.
Because I agree that config path sounds like config file.
Yeah.
But section path, I'm like, well, I wouldn't expect there to be a distinct file for a section, so
right.
It must be a different path.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's just prescribe that and see whether people push back.
But if we've already used config path elsewhere in API, then consistency is good.
All right. That brings us back to now we can look at future stuff. I guess the string one is not ready yet.
Okay.
Extend process start info by allow setting. Yeah. I mean, it seems reasonable. I even like the name.
I mean, it's going to be a Windows only thing, I assume.
Yes.
Do we want to keep adding OS specific things to process start info because that's where there already are some, or do we want to try being cleaner going forward?
So that's a good question. So I would generally say this. I would say it depends on the relative delta, in my opinion. Like if there's a massive new feature where it's reasonable to factor this into a separate set of types, I think we should. So we kind of did this for ECLs, where we kind of, instead of sprinkling the ECL APIs all over, we made them extension methods. That seems reasonable. For configuration state, that's probably a pain in the ass though, because how do you like plumb this stuff through, right? And
Well,
so
is process start info sealed?
probably not.
You could make Windows process start info.
Yeah, this goes back to like how messy is it though, right? Like if already like a bunch, I mean, there's already a bunch of Windows specific stuff on
You already
process
have
start
the user
info.
profile flag right there.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Like it's a question of, do we say that it's already
I would
a mud pit, we keep the mud pit, or do we want to try and figure out what a path forward looks like?
Yeah, to me it's kind of like, as I said, like it's relative complexity, right? Like if the thing is kind of like a relatively clean abstraction today and there's only one or two warts in it, then I think it's fine, or it's a reasonable thing to say, let's, instead of dumping more stuff onto it, let's have it on the side. But if the existing thing already is kind of grown from a Windows only thing to something else, like console, for example, then I think it's better to just say, screw it, we just add this one property here, and then, you know, we try to design new features with a different mindset, but let's not rock the boat.
Yeah. I don't know if load net credentials only makes sense.
And it's kind of like a
this
mirror
feature-
of these guys, right? Like login.
Yeah,
with
but this
profile.
feature it's not necessarily loading. It's saying for anything local, use my current credentials, but if I access something over the network, then use these credentials.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess Windows called it logon, which makes more sense, but then we decided to use load for the profile.
Oh, I mean, they used logon because they don't have typed enums. So that's helping you understand that it's for logon user.
I guess that's fair too. I mean, we could call it, you know, use net credentials only. But you said it's only for local, right?
Well, this flag makes it so that your process has two sets of credentials, one for local resources and one for remote.
I don't understand the only then.
Yeah, the
It seems like a Min32 already misnamed this guy then.
well, it's saying use it on the network only.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is one of those areas where Yeah, you probably should. Like, it seems like an advanced API to me, almost, where maybe it's just better to match the Win32 nomenclature and call it a day.
Right. So it seems like it's the functional behavior is you're still you local, but the moment it does NTLM or Kerberos, it stops being you. So it's like registering a shared username and password, but only for one account for all network usage for this process.
Yeah. So load user profile makes sense because it's actually loading a profile. It makes no sense to have load in this name.
Yeah.
So then, basically, the behavior is, if you specify this flag, we use the networking credentials for any remote calls, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't specify it, we would use your current credentials.
Yeah, so
Well,
like if you're on a network share, it will use these credentials to access that share.
Like, I think this is for if you're launching a password with an explicit username and password. It's saying use that as the credentials for the network. Don't change the current user for the local process. So it would run as it would run as, you know, Jabarton if it's looking at the local file system, but then if it starts talking to VSTS or whatever we call that these days, then it would be whatever username and password were put in the process start options.
Well, in that case, it probably is use credentials for networking only.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds better. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, it's not going to be used for all networking. Like things have to use the Windows credentials, I guess. So, but I think people looking for this will see it and understand what it means.
All right, so that was easy.
Are you going to go ahead and paint it in the proposal with minimum OS Windows 7?
Not quite. I just added the bullet point. All right. An Enum member API. Yeah, this one is not unreasonable. I mean, it's like, it doesn't do anything for perf. It just avoids saying the same thing multiple times, which I'm generally a fan of.
Yeah, and if I recall correctly, Jan's take is as long as it's not virtual, he's fine with those accelerators.
I mean, I'm honestly not sure I would use Enum member though. I would probably just go with key value pair, to be honest.
Key value pair?
Yeah, why would you not? It's basically you just return two things, right? You return a name, a string, and a value, right?
Oh, this is totally new stuff. I was assuming this was one of the many places that we had a thing that returned object, and they wanted it to be strongly typed.
Well, it's kind of like so basically, if you scroll up, right, instead of having two APIs that you have to overlap by index, you basically say you have one API that gives you back both at the same time. Which makes sense, right? Because very often you want just both of them, right? Like, why would you ever have to say them multiple times?
I mean, what's interesting is if you give back the values as a typed thing, then you have the name. It's just called toString. Like, you don't really need the tuple. The tuple just either means that we pre-evaluated it or is just an accelerator for toString. So key value pair would require pre-evaluating it. So I don't think it's valuable at all.
So the proposal for Enum member also lets you access attributes that were on the Enum member.
I see.
So this is more of a system reflection type API almost.
Yeah, at that point, I'm honestly like, why do you care?
What is our current API for getting attributes on Enum members?
Well, you just usually use get type and then get members or get fields and then say where is literal, right? And then you have all the enum fields, and then you just use them as a field member, and then you just ask that one for the. You can ask that for the value, where you just say get value with no instance because it's static. Like, we have an API, and it's actually not quite as bad as this here would be. I mean, like, honestly, I'm okay with accelerating this to something like this. But as soon as you want properties or something else, I would be like, okay, then you really want reflection.
Keep in mind that we have a 10-second delay on everything you speak. So when you say this to this...
The YouTubers know what you were highlighting when you said that, and we get to guess it by what came first when we see the highlight happen.
Yeah, so like when you look at the code sample that he has there, right, basically it's just is values and names, and he just wants to get both of them, right, as a typed version. That one, accelerating that to something that returns key value pair seems reasonable to me, but as soon as you want full-blown reflection, I would say, like, well, then you go reflect over that type.
Right, but I don't understand why you would write the first code, because if you call enum.getValues, that's giving you back the typed enum member, which means toString is its name. So calling the one gives you the both.
That's a good point, actually. Never thought of that. That is very, very reasonable.
Multiple values have the same name?
They can't.
I mean,
how would you declare an enum that has the same name represented twice?
Sorry. Different names, same value. If you call .toString on it, which name will you get?
The first one and the enum.
Yeah, so that would be slightly different than this, which I assume would give you both names.
That is correct. I would question the wisdom of that, but...
That's what just thinking of corner cases.
Yeah, I mean, like, that would be interesting. And certainly it probably would have also broken the example as written. Because presumably the names comes back longer than the values.
Do we have a generic get values already? APIs.net doesn't show it, but I'm kind of suspicious that that's because of indexing. Because the newest I have is 3.1.
We do have a get values.
I don't see a
It's not
generic one.
Generic though.
Yeah, I mean, I think having a generic get values one would at least save you from saying my enum twice, right? That I think I buy.
Yeah.
And
Worse,
then
it returns a array.
yeah, so it's well, because it basically instantiated with the right type already, right? And so like you have to, that's why you have to cast the sucker. But like, I honestly think like I would just have a generic one that basically just does what the code here does, because performance doesn't matter in this case. And then just say, yeah, if you want the value and the name, well, you get the values to string it, and then you have the name. And if you want anything else, reflection is your friend. Because at that point, there's like policy that, what do you want actually?
Yeah, if you want the alias names, so you can talk about all the names and then get their values, I think that there's an API for that, aside from enum.parse. But if nothing else, there's enum.parse.
Yeah, I mean, like in his case, I mean, I understand where he's coming from. Like, I bet you that's some sort of, I have an enum. I have some sort of like description attribute on it, and then I just do some model mapping where, in my model I have an enum, and then in the UI I want to display some nice values, right? And that's what he does. But I mean, this code here is also not the prettiest in the world, right? But then if you actually add the one line of reflection code above that, like that does not change the code in my opinion. And I certainly would not provide an API that would hardwire to this description attribute. I guess he's saying do that.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I mean, I guess I would be okay adding a get members that return to key value pair, but I would say no to the enum member class.
Well, I would also say no to this. The component model attribute collection type that does the acceleration for that. Like, to me, one of the problems that I have with this API is, like, on the one hand side, we talk super low level, right? We have enums. On the other end, we have something super high level, like a reflection introspection accelerator API. And I don't know, it seems like a very weird specialization for a place where, I don't know, is it that common?
What is the attribute collection trying to accomplish here, this change?
Yeah, if you just wait for 10 seconds. So there's this code sample that he has where he says my enum value equals something, and then he says give me the description for that. And so he would normally go by reflection to say get custom attribute, blah blah blah, type of description attribute, and then get the description. And so what he's basically able to do is he can say the attributes collection can have a get method that is generic that basically does that for him. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that we already have this member info thingy that does that, right? Member info.
Yeah, we can leave that out as well, I think.
Didn't we have a, maybe I'm,
We have a get attribute, I believe.
I was about to say, didn't we have a generic get attribute? We do,
but
right?
it's not on attribute collection.
Well, what is it
on,
over?
I think it's on like member or something like that.
All right. Maybe it's introspection. No.
Yeah, and we can't add get member because enum extends type, and type already has get member. Oh no, wait, enum extends.
No, we do have it. We have like we have custom attribute extensions. And custom attribute extensions, there is one on member info that you can just say get custom attributes of T. So you would just say get custom attributes of description attribute dot single or default question mark dot description. That's very close to what you wrote here.
Yeah.
Okay, so that means let's do this. So we basically said we would have a public static T array get values of T. And then we would say God damn it. Typing is hard, as it turns out. So we would have that, and then we would say this code. So this code becomes dun. All right, so then Okay. Let's do the notes from the previous one in it. Probably don't need those. All right, what do people think?
Looks good.
Alrighty. And then I think we are out of time. So we did good today. Then I see some of you later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Ciao.